They told me to stay out of it, like I was furniture they could simply place against a wall. My son, Mark, stood by the kitchen island, shoulders tight, the overhead light glinting off the stainless steel of the coffee maker. His wife, Sarah, held little Lily, shifting her weight, her expression carefully neutral, practiced. This was their house in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, a quiet suburb just outside Philadelphia. It had been my son's house, first, the place he'd bought with his first real job money, where I'd helped him paint the living room, a soothing gray, where I'd imagined grandchildren playing someday. Now it was theirs, and the space felt smaller, colder. They had called me over ostensibly to discuss Lily's erratic sleep schedule, something I'd mentioned gently might be related to feeding times. I had 30 years of nursing experience, two other grandchildren thriving, a lifetime of navigating the small, intricate needs of infants. But my experience was not welcome here. Mom, Mark had said, his voice low, strained, we appreciate you coming over, but we've got this. The pediatrician says it's just a phase. Sarah murmured agreement, stroking Lily's wispy hair. Lily, 6 months old, soft and warm in her arms, oblivious to the tension humming between the adults. The way Sarah held her, possessively, almost like a shield, felt like a physical barrier. It wasn't just about sleep schedules. It was about every suggestion, every piece of advice, every gentle observation I made. The weight gain chart I'd noticed wasn't quite tracking. The slight rash behind the knees, the way Lily seemed startled by loud noises more than the other babies I knew. Small things, perhaps, but they were my granddaughter's small things. I saw them, I worried about them, and every time I voiced them, I was met with that same polite, firm wall. Stay out of it. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen, delivered not shouted, but with a finality that felt louder than any yell. It stripped away my role, reduced me to a guest with no voice, no stake, no right to care beyond the parameters they set. It felt like a calculated dismissal, delivered with the veneer of respect, but carrying the sharp edge of contempt for my concerns, for my very presence as a participant in Lily's life. My hands, which had soothed countless babies, felt useless hanging by my sides. My mind, filled with quiet knowledge gleaned over decades, was deemed irrelevant. The kitchen, with its gleaming surfaces and modern appliances, suddenly felt airless, stifling. I looked at Lily's tiny face, her eyes closed in a fragile sleep, and a fierce, protective heat ignited in my chest, a silent counter-argument to their dismissal. My chest felt tight, constricted. I wanted to argue, to plead, to demand they listen, but the words wouldn't come. The emotional restraint was a cage I'd built around myself over the years, a necessary protection in a world that didn't always value quiet observation. But inside, the quiet was shattering. It was the drip, drip, drip of small indignities adding up. The times they didn't call when they said they would, the hurried goodbyes, the subtle eye rolls when I mentioned something about Lily's feeding. It wasn't overt cruelty, but a persistent, wearing down kind of neglect, not of Lily, but of me, in my role as grandmother, as someone who loved this child fiercely. It was a constant assertion of their control, a drawing of boundaries that felt less like protection and more like exclusion. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Sarah shifted Lily again, adjusting her blanket, a small, deliberate movement that reinforced the boundary. Mark avoided my eyes, looking instead at the handle of the refrigerator. They had their unit, their small family circle, and I was outside it, peering in, my hands pressed against the glass. My heart ached with a physical pain, sharp and sudden. It wasn't just about being told to stay out of it today. It was the culmination of months of feeling pushed to the periphery, of my love and concern being interpreted as interference. It was the realization that they didn't just disagree with me, they fundamentally disrespected my experience, my knowledge, my place in Lily's life. They saw me as a potential problem, not a source of support. And looking at Lily, so small and vulnerable, held so tightly in Sarah's arms, as if I might snatch her away, I knew I couldn't just stand by. Not anymore. The quiet instruction to stay out of it wasn't just about their household decisions. It felt like a command to extinguish my love, my worry, my very identity as her grandmother. And that was something I wouldn't. Oh, if you've lived through something like this, let me know where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious who else this resonates with. They dismissed it as over-anxious grandmothering. Dr. Evans, my friend and a retired pediatrician I sometimes confided in, had listened patiently on the phone a few weeks prior. She'd said, "Listen to your gut, Helen. You've seen enough babies to know the difference between a phase and a pattern." But listening to my gut felt increasingly difficult when every observation I made was deflected, rationalized, or met with polite dismissal. I'd noticed Lily arching her back frequently during feedings, fussing, not settling. I'd suggested maybe trying a different position or considering a sensitivity to something in Sarah's diet if she was breastfeeding. Mark had immediately jumped in. "Mom, Sarah's eating perfectly healthy. The doctor said Lily just has a bit of reflux. It's normal." Normal. Everything was normal to them, even when my trained eye saw something that warranted closer attention. It wasn't about being right, it was about being heard. It was about their unwillingness to consider that their first-time parent jitters might be blinding them to subtle cues, or that my experience offered a valuable second perspective. They'd even subtly mocked my note-taking. I kept a small notebook, jotting down feeding times, sleep patterns, weight checks from my visits. It was a habit from my nursing days, a way to track and identify patterns. Sarah had seen it once, lying on the coffee table. She'd smiled thinly. "Keeping tabs, Helen?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The implication was clear. I was spying, not observing. I was interfering, not caring. This environment of suspicion and dismissal was not conducive to open communication or to the well-being of a baby who needed her needs met, seen, and understood. I remembered a conversation with my late husband, George, years ago, about Mark when he was a toddler. Mark had a persistent cough, and the first doctor we saw said it was a virus. George wanted to wait it out, but my gut told me something was off. I insisted we see another doctor, who diagnosed walking pneumonia. George had trusted me. He'd respected my instincts, my knowledge. That was the missing piece now. Respect. It was like walking through their house blindfolded, not allowed to touch, to guide, to help. My suggestions were unwelcome intrusions into their carefully curated world of parenthood. They had read the books. They followed the apps. They listened to their pediatrician, selectively it seemed, when it confirmed what they already wanted to believe. But the subtle, intuitive knowledge that comes from lived experience from holding countless babies, soothing them, feeding them, watching them grow, that was irrelevant to them. Their control was absolute, a fortress built around Lily, with me on the outside, and the stay out of it command wasn't just about silencing me. It felt like they were actively preventing me from protecting Lily in ways they couldn't or wouldn't see. It felt like a dereliction of my grandmotherly duty, forced upon me by their decree. I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach, not just for Lily's physical well-being, though that was a constant hum of worry, but for the emotional damage this dynamic was causing. The distance they were creating wasn't just between them and me, it was setting a precedent for Lily's relationship with her grandmother, with her extended family. It was teaching her, implicitly, that my love was conditional, my presence negotiable, that her grandmother was someone to be kept at bay. The emotional damage felt profound, a slow-acting poison. I saw it in Sarah's strained smiles, in Mark's averted gaze, in the careful, performative way they presented their parenting choices. It wasn't about what was best for Lily. It was about asserting their authority, their independence, their control. And my love, my concern was seen as a threat to that control. I left their house that day with the stay out of it ringing in my ears. I drove home to my quiet apartment in downtown Philadelphia, the city lights blurring through the windshield. The silence there felt different from the silence in their kitchen. This was my silence, my space, but it felt empty without the possibility of being a vital contributing part of Lily's life. The dismissal felt not just personal, but existential. It questioned my competence, my motives, my very worth as a caregiver. It was a profound emotional betrayal, not just of my role, but of the bond I yearned to have with my granddaughter. The constant tension was exhausting. Every visit to their Ardmore house felt like navigating a minefield. I'd try to keep my observations to myself, biting my tongue, focusing on just holding Lily, breathing in her baby smell, feeling her small weight in my arms. But even these moments felt supervised. Sarah would hover, offering unsolicited advice on how to hold her, how to burp her, as if I were a novice. It was condescending, grating. It was public kindness masking private dismissal. "Oh, Helen, Maybe try supporting her head a little more. She likes it when you hold her closer. These were things I instinctively knew, things I'd done thousands of times. It wasn't helpful guidance. It was a subtle assertion of her perceived superiority as Lily's mother. Mark rarely intervened directly in these small power struggles, but his silence was complicity. He saw the dynamic, he heard the tone, and he did nothing to temper it. His loyalty was exclusively with Sarah, which was understandable, but it felt like a complete erasure of our history, of my role in his life. And now, my desperate desire to be in his daughter's life. I started receiving emails that felt clipped, formal. Responses to my offers of help were brief and often delayed. Thanks for the offer, Mom. We're okay for now. Or we've already made arrangements. It was a digital reflection of the in-person dismissal, clean and efficient, leaving no room for negotiation or warmth. One email, in particular, felt like a punch to the gut. I had offered to take Lily for a few hours on a Saturday so they could have some time alone. Maybe go to dinner. Sarah responded directly to my email, CCing Mark. We appreciate the thought, Helen, but we feel it's important for us to bond as a family right now. Perhaps when Lily is older. It was polite but final. It solidified the boundary. As a family, clearly excluded me. The phrase hung in the air, a quiet statement of my exclusion. It wasn't just about a Saturday afternoon. It was about my place, or lack thereof, in their definition of family. I folded the printout of that email and tucked it into my notebook, a small, private piece of evidence of the emotional distance they were cultivating. It felt important to document these slights, these subtle pushes away, not because I had a plan, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining it, that the pain wasn't just in my head. The notebook became a repository of these quiet injuries. Dates and times of dismissed suggestions, paraphrased lines of condescension, descriptions of interactions that left me feeling small and insignificant. It was a painful ritual, this act of recording my own invisibility. I started spending more time alone in my apartment. My friends noticed. You haven't mentioned seeing much of Lily lately, Helen, one said gently over coffee. I'd offer some vague excuse. It was easier than explaining the suffocating control, the feeling of being unwelcome in my own son's home, the deep ache of being kept from my granddaughter. I'd look at photos of Lily on my phone, tracing her small face with my finger, the only physical connection I felt truly alive. The contrast between the public image of happy new parents with a supportive grandmother and the reality of my isolation was stark. At a family gathering, Sarah made a point of telling a story about a parenting challenge they'd overcome, glancing pointedly at me as she emphasized, we figured it out ourselves, which felt really empowering. It was a thinly veiled jab, a public reaffirmation of their independence and, by extension, my lack of necessity. The air crackled with the unspoken tension, invisible to most, but suffocating to me. The humiliation was quiet, internal, but sharp. It was a constant, low-grade fever of emotional distress. I started to wonder if I was overreacting. Was I the problem? Was I truly interfering too much? The self-doubt was corrosive, another layer of pain. But then I would see Lily, even for a few minutes, see her slight fussiness that lingered, the dark circles under her eyes that seemed more than just a phase, and the protective instinct would surge, overriding the doubt. My gut still told me something wasn't quite right, that their rigid adherence to their own plan, their dismissal of any outside perspective, was potentially detrimental, and the command to stay out of it felt increasingly less like a boundary and more like an order to abandon ship. The breaking point wasn't dramatic, not outwardly. It was mundane, quiet, the kind of thing that happens in homes every day. Mark called, his voice tired. Mom, Lily's been running a fever since yesterday. Sarah's taking her to the pediatrician this afternoon. He sounded stressed, but also resigned. Oh, okay, I said, my heart instantly clenching. Have you been giving her fluids? Keeping her cool? He sighed, an impatient sound. Yes, Mom. We know what to do. Dr. Evans' office, Dr. Miller, our pediatrician, gave us instructions. Dr. Evans. The slip was tiny, but it registered. He knew I talked to Dr. Evans, my friend. He knew I had a trusted medical perspective, but they chose to ignore it. Well, please keep me updated, I said, keeping my voice no-fur, fighting the urge to rush over, to see for myself. Yeah, sure. Bye, Mom. Click. The line went dead. I sat with the silence, the dial tone a flat sound in the quiet apartment. Lily had a fever. Not a crisis, maybe, but a baby with a fever needed careful watching. And I was shut out, reduced to waiting by the phone for a filtered, minimal update. The lack of trust was a gaping wound. It wasn't just that they didn't want my advice, they didn't even want my presence, my comfort, my help when their daughter was sick. It was a profound rejection. Later that afternoon, Sarah texted. Pediatrician says it's just a viral thing. Keep giving her Tylenol. She's fine. Fine. Was she? The terse message offered no details, no reassurance beyond the bare minimum. It felt designed to shut down further inquiry. I texted back. Glad to hear it's not serious. Let me know if you need anything at all. Happy to come sit with her if you need a break. No response. For hours. The silence from their end was louder than any argument. It screamed, "We don't need you. We don't want you here." The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I pictured Lily, flushed with fever, uncomfortable, maybe scared, and I, her grandmother, just miles away, was forbidden from offering comfort. The stay out of it command reached a new level of cruelty. It wasn't just about preventing me from interfering. It was about preventing me from loving and caring for my granddaughter in a time of need. It was an active withholding of a fundamental human connection. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, unlike the quiet resentment that had been simmering. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This felt negligent. This felt wrong. I thought about Dr. Evans' words, listen to your gut. My gut was screaming. It wasn't just a phase. It wasn't just a viral thing. Something was missing, something fundamental in their approach. Warmth, intuition, a willingness to look beyond the textbook and see the individual child. My eyes fell on a small, worn photo album on the bookshelf. Photos of Mark as a baby, toddling, growing, photos of me holding him, feeding him, soothing him. Photos that represented a bond, a history, and now that history felt erased, deemed irrelevant by the next generation. I stood up, restless. I walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. The anonymous buildings seemed to mock my feeling of isolation. They had built their fortress, and I was on the outside. But looking out, a different kind of thought began to form. What if the boundary wasn't impenetrable? What if stay out of it was a challenge, not a command? What if the only way to be in it, to offer the care and connection Lily deserved, was to create my own opportunity? The idea formed slowly, then solidified with surprising speed. A surprise weekend trip. Just me and Lily. Time away from the tension. Time to just be together. For me to quietly observe, to care for her without the suffocating presence of their judgment and control. It was a radical thought, bordering on reckless. It would shatter the fragile peace, ignite a firestorm. But the alternative? Continuing to stand by, silent and helpless, while my granddaughter possibly needed more than they were providing, felt unbearable. The decision crystallized in that moment. I wouldn't just stand out of it, I would step in a way they least expected. The feeling wasn't triumph, but a grim determination. It was a desperate measure, born of love and despair. It was a reclaiming of my role, taken without permission. And as the idea took root, a strange sense of calm settled over me, replacing the anxiety. I would take my granddaughter. I would listen to my gut. The planning was quiet, meticulous. I didn't rush into it. The fever incident had been a catalyst, but the decision was based on months of accumulated slights and growing concern. I needed to be prepared. I pulled out my notebook, the one Sarah had mocked. It became a tool not just for documenting slates, but for planning an operation. I started noting their schedules, their habits. Friday evenings were always chaotic. They often ordered in, were tired from the week. A good window. Where would I go? Not too far, but far enough to feel like a genuine break, a change of environment for Lily and for me. I considered a few options, looking at maps, checking train schedules. A quiet town in southern New Jersey came to mind, Ocean City. It wasn't the beach season, but it had a boardwalk, the ocean air, a different feel from the suburbs. It was less than 2 hours away by car, manageable with a baby. I found a small, reputable-looking inn online, not fancy but clean, with good reviews. I booked a room for 2 nights, using a credit card they wouldn't see statements for. I used an old email address. Every step felt clandestine, thrilling, and terrifying. I started gathering things Lily would need, slowly, over several visits. A favorite blanket, a few toys, extra onesies. I packed a small bag for her, tucking it away in my closet at my apartment. I made sure I had her pediatrician's number, the number for the nearest hospital in Ocean City, just in case. I pulled out the paracetamol dosage chart from my nursing days, reviewed infant first aid. I was preparing not for a vacation, but for a mission. My friend, Dr. Evans, was the only person I confided in, cautiously. I didn't tell her the full plan initially, just that I was increasingly worried about Lily and feeling completely shut out. She listened, her voice steady. Keep your records, Helen, she advised. Note everything. Dates, times, what you observed, what they said. She didn't explicitly endorse my plan, but her words were a quiet validation of my concerns. She understood that sometimes the formal channels failed, and instinct was all you had left. Her support, subtle as it was a lifeline. I also consulted with a friend who was a paralegal, ostensibly about a hypothetical situation involving grandparents' rights. She explained the complexities, how difficult it was to gain standing, especially when the parents weren't neglectful in a way that social services would intervene. It's messy, Helen, she'd warned. Judges prefer parents to work things out, unless there's clear danger. Clear danger? Was Lily in clear danger? No, not in the way a court would define it. But was she thriving? Was she receiving the intuitive, responsive care she needed? My gut said no. The surprise trip wasn't about proving neglect in a legal sense. It was about providing a different kind of care, a different environment for a short period, and using that absence to force a conversation, a confrontation they had so far avoided. It was a power play, yes, but one born out of a profound sense of responsibility and love, not malice. I wrote a letter, not to them, not yet, to Lily. I poured out my heart, explaining why I felt compelled to do this. My hopes for her, my love. It was a private act, a way of clarifying my own motives, of grounding my drastic action in love. I sealed it and put it with the small bag. The act of writing solidified my resolve. There was no turning back now. Every mundane task felt charged with purpose. Grocery shopping, packing my own small suitcase, filling the car with gas. It was all preparation for the quiet escape. The tension was a constant hum beneath the surface, a low thrumming of fear and anticipation. I practiced my breathing exercises from my nursing days, trying to stay calm, focused. This wasn't about being anger. It was about being deliberate. The emotional shift was complete. I was no longer the dismissed grandmother, hurt and resentful. I was an actor, taking control, guided by my own conviction and love. The passive waiting was the time for quiet observation had passed. It was time to move. The quiet power felt solid, grounded. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. It was the power of knowing my own mind, of trusting my instincts, of being willing to take a risk for someone I loved. The clock was ticking towards Friday. The small bag sat by my door, a silent promise. Friday arrived, cloaked in the usual end-of-week exhaustion that settled over the suburbs. Traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway was heavy, a familiar, frustrating crawl. I left my apartment earlier than usual, driving towards Ardmore. My heart was a drumbeat in my chest, loud in the quiet car. I had told Mark I wanted to drop off some things for Lily, a few books I'd bought, a hand-me-down coat from my other grandchild, a plausible excuse. I arrived just as dusk was settling, the streetlights casting long shadows. Their house looked warm and inviting from the outside, a picture of domesticity. I parked down the street, checking my appearance in the rearview mirror, calm, composed. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. I had parked strategically, facing the direction of the highway south. The small bag for Lily was on the passenger seat, covered by a blanket. I walked up the familiar path to their front door. Mark answered, looking tired. Hey, Mom, come on in. Sarah was in the kitchen, plating dinner, takeout containers on the counter. Lily was in her playpen in the living room, fussing softly. This was the chaos I had anticipated. They were distracted, settling in for a long, quiet Friday night after a long week. Just wanted to drop these off, I said, holding up a small bag with the books and coat on top. And see my girl, of course. I kept my voice light, normal. Mark took the bag. Thanks, Mom. That's nice. He didn't invite me to stay for dinner. He didn't offer me a drink. He didn't ask about my week. The usual quiet dismissal. I walked into the living room. Lily saw me and her face lit up with that pure, unadulterated joy only babies possess. She reached for me, her small hands grasping the air. My heart melted. This connection, this pure love, was what they were trying to regulate, to limit. Hey, sweet girl, I murmured, reaching into the playpen to pick her up. She settled against my shoulder, a warm, familiar weight. I held her close, breathing her in. She still felt a little warm. The slight fussiness was still there. I rocked her gently, walking around the living room, away from the kitchen doorway where Mark and Sarah were talking quietly. This was the moment. My stomach clenched, but my hands were steady. I walked towards the front door, which Mark had left slightly ajar. I think she's getting tired, I said softly, my back to them. Maybe I'll just take her for a little stroll on the porch, get some fresh air. It wasn't unusual for me to do this when I visited, a small ritual of connection. Mark mumbled something in assent from the kitchen. Sarah didn't respond. They were already moving on, back to their dinner, their conversation. Assuming I would be back in a few minutes, returning Lily, I didn't hesitate. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting my face. Lily stirred slight but stayed asleep against my shoulder. I didn't stop on the porch. I walked down the steps, onto the path, towards the street, towards my car. It felt both surreal and hyper-real. Every sound, every sensation amplified. The gravel crunching under my shoes, the distant hum of traffic, Lily's soft breathing against my neck. I reached the car, opened the passenger door with one hand, carefully placed Lily in the car seat I had hidden on the floor, and buckled her in. She stirred but didn't wake. I closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, got in, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look back at the house. The streetlights blurred as I pulled away. The small bag for Lily was right there, accessible. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily, sleeping peacefully. The silence in the car was different now. It wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was the charged silence of action taken. The grim determination was still there, now mixed with a potent cocktail of fear and adrenaline. They wouldn't realize she was gone immediately, not until they finished dinner, not until they came to check on her. I had perhaps 15-20 minutes, enough time to get onto the highway, to disappear into the Friday night traffic heading south. The point of no return had been crossed the moment I buckled Lily into the car seat. There was no going back now. Whatever came next, I would face it. My hands on the steering wheel were trembling slightly, but my resolve was firm. I was taking my granddaughter, not away from love, but towards a different kind of love, a different kind of care. And I was finally, undeniably, in it. The drive south was a blur of highway lights and the soft sounds of Lily sleeping in the back seat. Every mile felt like a further step away from the suffocating tension of Ardmore. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, checking on her, listening to her quiet breaths. She slept for most of the drive, occasionally stirring, a small hand reaching up towards her face. When she woke, I pulled over at a rest stop, changed her diaper, and offered her a bottle of expressed milk I had brought. Feeding her, alone in the quiet privacy of the car, felt different. There was no one watching, no one commenting, no subtle judgment, just me and Lily, connected by this simple act of care. It felt grounding, right? I talked to her softly as I drove, telling her about the ocean, about the seagulls, about the quiet inn where we would stay. My voice was low and soothing, for both of us. As we neared Ocean City, the air changed, growing cooler, carrying the faint, salty smell of the sea. Even in the dark, I could feel the presence of the ocean, a vast, ancient entity that put human conflicts into perspective. We arrived at the inn around 9 p.m. It was a charming, older building, quiet and welcoming. The innkeeper, a kind-faced woman named Martha, checked us in, her eyes lingering on the sleeping baby. Traveling alone with the little one? She asked gently. Just a little getaway, I said, managing a small smile. She showed us to our room, which was cozy and clean, with a comfortable bed and a small armchair by the window. It wasn't luxury, but it felt safe, a haven. I put Lily down in the portable crib I had requested. She stirred but remained asleep. I sat in the armchair, The silence of the room profound after the hum of the car engine. My phone buzzed, and buzzed, and buzzed. Missed calls from Mark. Missed calls from Sarah, text filled with question marks. Then escalating panic, then anger. Mom, where are you? Where is Lily? Call us immediately. Then, more ominous, Helen, if you don't bring her back, we're calling the police. The threats were there, stark and raw on the screen. My hands were shaking again, but the feeling was different now. Not just fear, but a strange sense of power. They were reacting. Their carefully constructed control had been bypassed. I didn't respond immediately. I needed a moment to breathe, to center myself. I looked at Lily, sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling rhythmically. She was safe. She was with me. That was the immediate reality. The fear was real, the potential consequences daunting. Kidnapping. That word loomed large and terrifying. But was it kidnapping to take your grandchild away from a situation you genuinely believed was not serving her best interests? My paralegal friend's words echoed, unless there's clear danger. I knew this was a gray area, a risky gamble, but I had trusted my gut, and my gut had told me this was necessary. I composed a text message, carefully, not emotional, factual. Lily is safe. We are taking a short break. She is well. I will call you in the morning when she is rested. We need to talk properly, without yelling or judgment. Until then, please know she is loved and cared for. I sent it. The silence from their end, after the flurry of messages, was sudden and absolute. The ball was in their court now, but on my terms. The first step had been taken. The surprise weekend trip had begun, and the quiet, internal struggle had burst into the open, demanding to be addressed. The destination wasn't just a change of scenery. It was a place where I could finally have the conversation that had been silenced for so long. It was a place where Lily could exist, just for a little while, outside the suffocating bubble of her parents' control. And for me, it was a place to stand my ground, to reclaim my voice. Not as an interfering outsider, but as a grandmother asserting her fundamental right to love and care. The next morning in Ocean City was quiet, overcast. Lily woke up around 7 a.m., smiling up at me from the crib. It was the first time in months I had seen her first morning smile without the immediate presence of her parents. I picked her up, and she snuggled into me, warm and soft. We spent the morning in the room, just I fed her, changed her, played with her on the floor. I observed her quietly. She seemed brighter than she had in Ardmore. Her fussiness was lessened, her color better. Maybe it was just the change of environment, or maybe it was something more. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy in this simple, uninterrupted time with her. It was a stark contrast to the tension that usually surrounded my interactions with her at their house. Around 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was tight, strained, a mix of relief and anger. Mom, where are you? Are you crazy? We were worried sick. I told you she was safe, I said calmly, keeping my voice low so as not to startle Lily, who was playing on the rug. We're in Ocean City. We needed a break. A break. You just took her? Helen, that's not okay. That's not how you do things. Mark? I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. We needed to talk. And you and Sarah haven't been willing to do that. Not really. Not about my concerns. You just tell me to stay out of it. My voice wavered slightly on the last words, recalling the sting. Concerns? What concerns? The pediatrician said she's fine. His voice was rising now. There are things I've observed, Mark. Things you and Sarah dismiss. Her fussiness, the way she arches her back, the sleep issues that haven't resolved. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something that needs a closer look. And you haven't been open to even considering it. So you kidnap her? The word hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. It's not kidnapping, Mark. I'm her grandmother. I'm concerned about her well-being. And I felt I had no other way to make you listen. I have my notebook here, I said, my voice gaining strength. I've documented my observations. The dates, the times I tried to talk to you, the emails dismissing my help. I didn't do this lightly. There was a silence on the other end. He hadn't known I was keeping records. Mom, this is insane, he finally said, his voice lower now, perhaps a flicker of uncertainty in his tone. What do you want? I want to be heard, Mark. I want my concerns about Lily to be taken seriously. I want to be allowed to be her grandmother. Truly, without constant judgment and dismissal. I want to be a part of her life in a meaningful way, not just a supervised visitor. And you thought taking her to Ocean City was the way to achieve that? Sarcasm laced his voice. It was the only way I could think of to make you stop telling me to stay out of it, I replied honestly. It forced the issue. Now we have to talk. We talked for another hour, a strained, difficult conversation. Sarah joined in at one point, her voice sharp and accusatory. You had no right, Helen. We're calling our lawyer. Go ahead, I said quietly. I've consulted with someone myself. I haven't broken any laws by taking my grandchild on a trip, especially when I can demonstrate genuine concern for her welfare and a history of being prevented from discussing it. I didn't elaborate on the legal specifics, but the mention of consultation seemed to give them pause. The conversation ended without a resolution, but with an agreement to talk again later, calmly, and to include Sarah's parents in the discussion. A neutral ground of sorts, the power dynamic had undeniably shifted. I had taken a drastic step, but it had forced them to engage, not on their terms of dismissal, but on the terms of a serious, high-stakes conversation. The quiet of the in-room settled around me after the call. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was tempered by a sense of weary accomplishment. I had risked everything, but I had finally made them listen. And I had Lily here with me, safe and smiling in the morning light. We spent the day in Ocean City quietly. I took Lily for a walk along the boardwalk, the empty off-season shops lining the way, the ocean roaring softly in the distance. The air was cool and crisp. Lily, bundled up in her stroller, seemed captivated by the unfamiliar sights and sounds. I talked to her constantly, pointing out the seagulls, the waves, the few other people we saw. It felt like building a new memory, just for us, away from the weight of the conflict. We went back to the inn for lunch, a simple meal in the dining room. Martha, the innkeeper, smiled at Lily. She's a darling, she said. Small moments of warmth from a stranger felt significant after the emotional coldness I'd experienced. Later that afternoon, while Lily napped, I reviewed my notebook, page after page of observations, dates, paraphrased conversations, copies of those clipped emails. It was a chronicle of being shut out, of concerns dismissed, of a grandmother's love being treated as an inconvenience. Reading through it solidified my resolve. This wasn't about being petty. It was about fighting for my place. And more importantly, fighting for Lily's right to have a close, involved grandmother who saw her needs and wasn't afraid to voice them. Sarah texted in the late afternoon. My parents want to meet tomorrow at their house in Cherry Hill. We need to sort this out. Be there at 10 a.m. Cherry Hill was another suburb near Philadelphia, about an hour's drive from Ocean City. It was progress, a meeting mediated by her parents. It wasn't ideal, but it was movement towards a resolution. I confirmed I would be there. The request to meet at her parents' house felt like another subtle power play, holding the meeting on their turf. But I was past caring about such small battles. The big battle was being heard, establishing my role, ensuring Lily's well-being wasn't compromised by their need for control. I spent the evening in the room with Lily, playing, reading to her, just enjoying her presence. The quiet peace of the inn was a stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing, which I knew would break tomorrow. As I put Lily down for the night, I felt a surge of protectiveness. I had brought her here, created this temporary haven. Now I had to face the consequences, the confrontation, but I wouldn't be facing it as the dismissed grandmother who was told to stay out of it. I would be facing it as the grandmother who had acted, who had forced the conversation, who had shown she would not be easily erased from Lily's life. The quiet defiance had blossomed into active assertion. The fear was still a companion, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. I reviewed my notes again, preparing my points, anticipating their arguments. I wouldn't be defensive. I would be calm, factual, and focused on Lily's well-being. My core message was simple. I love Lily, I am concerned about certain aspects of her care, and I will not be shut out of her life. This weekend trip, while unconventional, was a direct result of their unwillingness to listen and their repeated attempts to sideline me. It was a risky strategy, but standing by and doing nothing felt riskier to my soul. and potentially to Lily's long-term connection to her wider family. The quiet power I felt in Section 5 was solidifying into a determined strength. I wasn't seeking vengeance or control for its own sake. I was seeking a place, a voice, and the ability to love and care for my granddaughter without permission, as grandmothers have done for generations. The night was quiet in Ocean City. I slept fitfully, the anticipation of the meeting churning in my mind. But Lily slept soundly in her crib nearby. Her presence was a comfort, a reminder of why I had taken this drastic step. Saturday morning brought a pale gray sky over the Jersey shore. I dressed Lily carefully, packed our small bag, and left the inn after a quiet breakfast. Martha wished us safe travels, her smile warm. The drive to Cherry Hill felt shorter than the drive down had, though the weight of the upcoming meeting pressed down on me. I arrived at Sarah's parents' house precisely at 10 a.m. It was a large, well-maintained home, reflecting a comfortable, settled life. Sarah's mother, Carol, answered the door. She looked strained but composed. "Helen," she said, her voice neutral. "Come in." Sarah and Mark were sitting in the living room, looking tired and serious. Sarah's father, Robert, was also there, his expression unreadable. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. We sat, the silence stretching. Robert cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, Helen. As you know, we're here because of what happened this weekend." Taking Lily. What happened this weekend, I stated calmly, was a direct consequence of months of feeling shut out, dismissed and unheard regarding my granddaughter's well-being. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make accusations. I simply stated the facts of my experience. I pulled out my notebook. I haven't just been sitting by. I've been observing and I've been trying to communicate my concerns. Here are notes from date regarding Lily's feeding issues. Here is an email from date where I offered to help and was told you were okay for now. I didn't read everything, just referenced specific entries. Enough to show I wasn't speaking from vague feelings, but from documented experience. Their expressions shifted. They hadn't anticipated this level of preparation, this quiet presentation of proof. "We felt you were interfering, Helen," Sarah said, her voice defensive. "We're her parents. We know what's best." "I am her grandmother, Sarah," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "My role is different, but it is not irrelevant. My experience is not interference, it is a resource. When I see something that concerns me, especially when it pertains to a child I love dearly, I will not stay silent." Being told to stay out of it when I expressed genuine concern for Lily's health and happiness is unacceptable. I talked about Lily's persistent fussiness, her sleep problems, the observations that led me to believe it might be more than just a phase. I didn't make demands or issue ultimatums. I simply laid out my perspective, my concerns, and the history of their dismissal. Robert listened intently, occasionally glancing at Mark and Sarah. Carol remained quiet, her eyes moving between me and her daughter. "What do you propose, Helen?" Robert asked eventually, his tone measured. "What outcome are you look for from this?" He gestured vaguely, acknowledging the situation I had created. "I want open communication," I said clears. "I want my concerns to be heard and discussed respectfully, not immediately dismissed. I want to be allowed to be an active, welcomed part of Lily's life, to spend time with her without feeling like I am under surveillance or on a strict clock. I want Mark and Sarah to acknowledge that shutting me out completely, especially when I'm offering help or expressing worry, is not healthy for our family dynamics or for Lily's relationship with her grandmother. It wasn't about getting my way on every small thing, but about establishing a foundation of respect and inclusion. I wasn't asking for control over Lily's upbringing, but for a voice, for trust, for a recognized place in her life. The conversation was difficult, painful. Tears were shed, frustrations aired. Mark spoke, expressing his own stress, his feeling of being caught in the middle. Sarah reiterated her need for independence as a parent. But my calm, factual presentation of my documented experiences shifted the dynamic. It wasn't just a grandmother feeling hurt. It was a pattern of behavior, a history of exclusion, presented with quiet evidence. Robert facilitated the discussion, steering it away from blame and towards finding a way forward. He acknowledged that perhaps my concerns hadn't been given the weight they deserved, and that telling me to stay out of it was likely counterproductive. He also acknowledged Mark and Sarah's need to parent independently, but stressed the importance of family support and communication. The meeting lasted for over 2 hours. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a beginning. We agreed to try regular family check-ins specifically focused on Lily, where everyone could voice their observations and concerns without immediate judgment. Mark and Sarah agreed to be more open to my offers of help, and I agreed to try and phrase my suggestions as questions or gentle observations, rather than direct advice. It was a fragile truce, built on the rubble of the past few months and the shockwave of the weekend trip. As I left their house, Lily stirring in my arms, the air felt lighter, though still heavy with the aftermath. The power contrast between public kindness and private dismissal had been exposed. The quiet ritual of documenting my invisibility had served its purpose. I had used the act of taking Lily away, not as an ending, but as a shocking, undeniable beginning to a necessary conversation. The journey back to Philadelphia felt different. It wasn't an escape anymore, but a return. And I was returning not as the dismissed outsider, but as a grandmother who had fought, and perhaps won a small important victory, the right to be heard. Returning to my apartment felt like reclaiming my own space, my own peace. The weekend had been emotionally draining, but it had accomplished what months of passive waiting could not. Lily was back with her parents, but the conversation had been forced open. The confrontation in Cherry Hill hadn't resolved everything, but it had cracked the facade of their control and forced an acknowledgement of my concerns and my need to be included. The following days were tense, but different. There were still moments of friction, of old habits resurfacing, but there was also a new, cautious line of communication open. Mark called me that evening, not angry, but weary. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than it had been in months. That was hard. Today, "I know, Mark," I said. "It wasn't easy for anyone." "I didn't realize you felt that shut out," he admitted, a hesitant acknowledgement. I just, we just wanted to do things our way." "Doing things your way is fine," I said. "But shutting out the people who love you and want to help, that's not healthy. For you or for Lily." He was quiet for a moment.
Yeah, I get.
"Look, Sarah wants to try having you over for dinner next week. No agenda, just dinner." It was a small olive branch, but it was something. "I'd like that, Mark," I said. "Thank you." The shift was subtle, not a grand declaration, but a hesitant step towards rebuilding. We started the agreed upon regular check-ins. They were awkward at first, formal, but slowly, tentatively, a more open dialogue began to emerge. I still kept my notebook, but the entries started to change. Less about dismissals, more about observations shared, questions asked and answered, small agreements reached. I learned to frame my concerns gently as "have you considered," or "I noticed. So what do you think?" And they, slowly, learned to listen without immediate defensiveness. I wasn't always right, and they weren't always wrong. The point wasn't for me to take over, but from my perspective to be one of several voices in the conversation about Lily's care. I started seeing Lily more regularly, and the visits felt less strained. I could hold her, play with her, feed her a bottle, without the constant feeling of being watched or judged. I saw subtle changes in their parenting too, perhaps, influenced by the forced reflection of the weekend, or by the pressure from Sarah's parents. They seemed slightly more responsive to Lily's cues, less rigidly tied to schedules. Maybe my concerns, voiced so drastically, had planted seeds of doubt that led to their own observations. There was never a full, dramatic apology. That wasn't their style, or perhaps mine either. The resolution was quiet, incremental. It was in the tentative steps towards open communication, in the hesitant offers of inclusion, in the slow rebuilding of trust. The legal worries faded. My act, while alarming, had been short-lived and clearly motivated by concern, not malice. It had served its purpose as a shock to the system, a way to break through the wall of silence and dismissal. My friend Dr. Evans called. "Heard things different?" she said gently. I explained the aftermath, the difficult conversations, the tentative progress. "You listen to your gut, Helen," she said. "Sometimes that's all you can do." Her words were a quiet affirmation. I spent more time in my apartment, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like my space, my sanctuary, where I could process, reflect, and simply be. I still looked at the photos of Lily, but now they were accompanied by recent memories of shared moments, not just longing. The quiet dignity I had fought for was not a loud proclamation. but an internal state. It was the knowledge that I had acted on my convictions, that I had refused to be erased, that I had shown the depth of my love and concern, even when it meant taking a difficult, risky path. The maternal revenge arc wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming a fundamental right, the right to love and care for my grandchild, to have my voice heard in her life. It was quiet, yes, but it was powerful. It was the power of a grandmother who refused to stay out of it, and by stepping in, found her place again. The resolution wasn't perfect. The future wasn't guaranteed to be without conflict, but the suffocating grip of dismissal had loosened. And in my own quiet space, I finally felt a sense of peace, hard won and deeply personal. I sat by my window, looking out at the city, no longer feeling isolated, but connected by the fragile threads of a family tentatively healing.